Okay, our last session before your lunch break is about labels are for jam jars, changing narratives and destigmatising addiction. Dan Raffell. Raffell, is that right? Yep. Dan Raffell is the National Manager of Smart Recovery Australia. Originally from Scotland, Dan has 18 years of experience of working with addiction and recovery, peer education, youth and homelessness sector in the UK and Australia. Dan's qualifications include an honours degree in addiction studies, diplomas of integrated counselling, cognitive behavioural therapy. Dan has a real passion seeing people who are experiencing addictive behaviours gain more control over their lives. He is also a strong advocate in peer support. Put your hands together to welcome Dan.
Thank you very much. Great to see so many people pushing through the hunger pains before lunchtime, so I appreciate your attention. I am reading from my notes today. It's not normally what I do to present, but it's to keep the reins upon me just with my limited time. Addict, alcoholic, clean, dirty, disorder, disease, druggie, criminal, ex-addict, drunk, waster. Captious terms I'm sure you've heard before, terms you probably, if you were honest, used before, or heard colleagues, media, family, politicians, even clients use. Now, I hope the majority of us at some point have at least tried to change or challenge ourselves over the language over the years, and probably worked quite hard to disrupt the stereotypes in our daily work. But what about the rest of the community? We all know that substance use impacts so many different ways. 107 million people globally officially diagnosed with an alcohol disorder, 35 million people with a drug disorder. That's 1 in 10 Australians. If to go around the room, if it was Netflix stand chocolate binges, probably 1 in 2, 1 in 3 maybe. Just to know, I don't always find the word disorder very helpful because these figures simply are who have been diagnosed. And there are many more people that don't engage in support in that way, may not identify as having an addiction. The World Health Organization did a cross-cultural study in 2010, and drug and alcohol were high in regarding the most stigmatizing conditions, drugs being number 1. We know that stigma is an evidence barrier for people seeking help. In fact, according to the United Nations Office on Drug and Crime, the stigma associated with these issues can delay people seeking treatment for up to 6 years. How many don't even survive that long? For every person seeking support, there's another 6 who don't get assistance and are possibly never seen another sunset. There's clear evidence that there are a number of identifiable causes that create stigma. The significant drivers are policy of prohibition, negative media portrayals, language that's commonly used, stereotyping by health professionals, and internalized stigma. Now, I'm not an expert on policy. There have been many wonderful presentations that are, but we agree we need to change. Policy shapes society's framework, core beliefs and mindsets, and subsequent responses. The criminalisation of use produces a negative portrayal that then impacts the perceptions of these individuals and then the person's very identity. With someone's identity being questioned, then creates a space for stigmatisation and discrimination. Drug reform will always be a hot topic, and we know that Australia's response to drugs currently is focused on law and order. This was seen by the level of government funding spent in the war on drugs. 66% of funds on illicit drug programs. Stigma is a complex social issue. The media has a lot to answer for, and apologies if anyone works in the media, has an important part to play in our society, and unfortunately also has a big part in where we are today with stigma. The media also heavily influences society, and the ramifications can impede the progress and deeply stigmatizes people with addictive behaviours. Many address addictive behaviours from a negative, condemnatory and moralising approach. This situation does nothing but feed the prejudices around the person with problematic use, who are considered a criminal in the social imaginary and accordingly treated with contempt. We do not need to look far in the media to see the way individual groups are spoken to in discriminatory ways and how language is so powerful to shape societal values and beliefs. They tend to be in ways that brings a sense of mistrust towards the individuals in question. Queensland Mental Health Commission defined it in this way: it discredits an individual in the eyes of society and results in the person being devalued, discriminated against, and labelled as deviant. In SMART, we see self-stigma playing a major barrier to change. If policy and society play their part as aforementioned, then of course the very self-perception and identity for the individual that's taken on board is much more likely to negate and nullify possible change. It's common to work with so many participants that have a self-deprecating negative attitude towards themselves. And I know there are well-known recovery models out there that have helped people but still use quite derogatory and self-labelling language. Yes, sometimes it's about helping people acknowledge the issue and journey through the stages of change. However, there's a vast difference between the identification of a behaviour compared to taking an identity and self-labelling as, I'm an addict, I'm an alcoholic. Are they always helpful terms to use for yourself if you're trying to move away from this behaviour and start a new lifestyle? It's up to the individual. I can't help think when people use terms like powerlessness over decisions and behaviours, that this hinders change and removes their responsibility to make change. The enormity of stigma around people with lived experience through public policy, media and community can cause a person to internalise these perceptions and to have them start believe they're a bad person. This causes a feeling of shame, self-loathing, and a belief that they're not worthy of help. This can further lead them to identify the fear of that stereotype and creating the reenactment of that stereotype, therefore perpetuating harmful behaviour. Self-stigma has an enormous impact on self-esteem, as we know, leads to anxiety, isolation from family, friends, and the broader society. Not only does the person with the problematic behaviour have to deal with the direct issues related to their individual situation, the associated stigma can lead them depleted of their ability to activate cognitive behavioural techniques, including their ability to problem solve. It can reduce the ability of those with problematic behaviour to self-monitor and have a balance to their own behavioural responses. The challenge is self-stigma can be difficult to identify and act upon. I want to share a couple of case studies with you. Dylan suffered acute anxiety, problematic behaviour around drugs and alcohol, and he reached out to Smart Recovery. Went on to be a success story. He studied computer engineering, started a popular peer-led group to help others, became a strong advocate. Importantly and bravely, he went public with his story. This is where events dramatically changed. He worked for a multinational company, and a client saw his story and immediately demanded he be removed from their account. He was referred to as a criminal through social media. This experience led him to spiralling into deep depression, and he's now withdrawn from community involvement. He's been let down because of the toxic stigma attached. We've lost contact with him. Case study 2. JP grew up in a low socioeconomic area, fell into drug use at an early age, started using drugs, became dependent on opiates, sought recovery, made transformation, got married, had kids, was a manager at a homeless service. A few years later, he fell back into a bit of an old behaviour cycle. His family, and mainly his in-laws, showed such discrimination it tore his life apart. He spiralled into a dark hole, got in serious trouble with the law, lost his leg due to injecting drugs again. He's currently in a wheelchair for life, living on disability benefits, lives on his own, hardly ever sees his kids. These stories are heartbreaking. Stories like this are avoidable. Lack of education, insight, compassion is what will let these people down. A judgmental attitude and an inability to see change in someone's life. Discrimination like this is so sad. Case study 3, started drinking, smoking cannabis at 13, progressed to party drugs, ecstasy, amphetamines, LSD, heroin, methadone, taking control of his life for nearly a decade. And out of trouble with the law, stealing and dealing to get by. Overdosed numerous times. Experienced names like junkie, waster, druggie, scumbag, criminal. Never amount to anything. It affected his employment. Friends, peers scoffed at him, judged him, and his name was tarnished through his social networks. Desperately needed and wanted help. What happened to this guy? Handsome fella. Great face for radio, that guy. We all made significant changes in our lives and wanted to use these experiences to benefit others. Dylan unfortunately worked in a field that did not have empathy or understanding and probably aligned with much of the media and policy what they spout. JP felt that his in-laws never fully trusted him after 15 years. He made a mistake and he says he would have bounced back. Instead of discrimination, he experienced forgiveness and compassion and love. And his in-laws would have avoided a marriage breakdown. My situation now, having 20 years under my belt, is an evidence in true transformation. I've similarly gone on to use experiences to help my career and help others. I also took as much opportunity as I could to share my story and help others in a safe space, and thankfully it's done nothing but benefit my journey. However, I refuse to call myself an addict or label myself even as an ex or recovering anything. I've moved on. It's possible. My mindset changed in such a profound way that I've never looked back, and I'm thankful the stigma I experienced only served as a reinforcement of what I've done and where I've come from. Only possible by having supportive people around me, amazing organisations I work with, that did not judge, stigmatise or discriminate against me for my story. Now, I often reflect on celebrity stories. There's many: Russell Brand, Michael Phelps, Marilyn Monroe, Elvis Presley, Elton John, Drew Barrymore, Ben Affleck, even further back, Thomas Edison, Benjamin Franklin, Vincent van Gogh, Hemingway, heck, even Sigmund Freud was a cocaine user. We do not necessarily think them as addicts. We do not simply remember the negative things they've done. I think a big part of this is their ability to tell their story and tell people the many facets of what makes them who they are, and the skills and the experiences they have to share. They're much more than their behaviours. To be honest, we hold them in high regard, hearing such stories of change and transformation and redemption. It's even inspirational. Change is possible. So what's our approach? Well, policy reform will play a vital component of this change. There's growing evidence that decriminalisation and regulation does remove stigma, encourages help-seeking behaviour, reduces crime and incarceration rates. There are currently 25 countries in the world that have a form of decriminalisation for drug possession. We need to work together and communicate effectively with the government and policymakers to bridge the gap between policy and individual experience. Australian government is a little cautious and conservative regarding this. Addiction is a complex mental health issue characterised by a chronic relapsing nature and is both preventable and treatable. And it's not a result of moral failure or criminal behaviour. We know that people do recover when given access to evidence-based care. Increasing awareness of addiction and problematic as a chronic but treatable issue is needed to overcome stigma and promote a shift from exclusion and blame towards compassion and support. There are many debates out there, and I'm only one opinion, but we do remember around decriminalisation. But we do well to remember that alcohol was legal, and look at the impact that's having. The fair treatment, the reform on drug campaigns calling for further harm reduction initiatives and drug policy and regulation, and Australian federal drug summits that happen, well, fairly irregularly, but we hope to see some progress, albeit very, very slow. Mission Smart Recovery make accessible to everyone in Australia. This means all behaviours by nature level in the playing field when discussing problematic behaviour. We have those struggling with drugs, alcohol, pornography, sex, gambling, food, medication, smoking. And if you want to come for your stand on Netflix, you're welcome to come as well. Engaging everyone in the same conversations and processes in a non-judgmental and peer support, mutual aid harm minimisation framework is vital. SMART strongly supports harm reduction as evident by our harm minimisation statement, which you can see on our website, and we continue to grow advocacy and influence in policy as well as playing a leadership role in the AOD sector as an important component of our strategic plan. SMART is presented at the Australian Parliamentary Drug Policy, federal and state governments as an active member of Harm Reduction Australia, engaging and supporting in other stigma-reducing policy campaigns like Support Don't Punish, Rethink Addiction, and recently our own global campaign, Take On Addiction, which I'll share very shortly. We've also engaging fantastic ambassadors like Mick Palmer on board as well. We need to be active influencers in the media. At Smart, we try to be active in sharing stories, involved in podcasts, radio, sharing ideas on research, and engaging the media as much as we can. As we may be aware, the AOD Media Watch was established to monitor a reporting of media portrayal around drug and alcohol-related issues. To support this change, they have developed a reporting on alcohol and other drugs guidelines for journalists. However, this initiative has a low level of adoption by the media sector. Smart are also aiming to advocate for a stronger alliance in the AOD Media Watch and Mindframe National Media Initiative. Smart maintain an ongoing bank of success stories from Smart programs for use in all our communications delivered by Smart, but it's vital to provide media training to fully equip numerous facilitators and peers and participants to represent themselves and the organisation as spokespeople, as well as we have to learn lessons that Dylan learned. We as an organisation continue to discuss even the word addiction. In all our Smart literature and model, just continuing to be sensitive to the challenges of such language and terms for people that may not identify as having an addiction. Where do they go for support? We also need to try and be in line with the language guidelines developed by peak bodies such as NADA. And Smart has a real focus on recruiting media ambassadors such as previous board member Jenny Valentish, fitness models Alexi Towersey, and the Kate and Mary Hornshaw story. And training, as I said, it all appears in media training. Self-stigma. The rejection of stigma by an individual can occur when the person is self-aware enough to see it as discrimination and conflicts with their values and identity, leaving them resilient enough to ignore it. There are interventions that can be used that can assist many people along this path, like Smart Recovery. Self-control can be restored by the frequent practicing of self-regulating activities such as CBT and mindfulness. In Smart, we do work very hard to support the change of mindsets and challenge unhelpful thinking and around separating identity and behaviour. At Smart, we work hard to facilitate this positive behavioural change in our weekly sessions. We try and incorporate CBT and mindfulness into the discussions and the plans. Values and core beliefs are a strong researched area of Smart, and we actively discuss the idea of stigma and labels and challenge ideology. We actively invest in peers and those with lived experience and celebrate the skills, the experiences, the resilience, the determination and strengths that each person has to be able to support other people in the same space. We're also actively involved, these individuals, in research, program development, because you know what, these participants are the experts on the field, not us. One of the biggest efforts recently to try and address stigma is kicking off our first ever global campaign called Take On Addiction. We partnered with Easy Raise, who are commonly known for the Dry July campaigns, and they helped us kick off our new yearly campaign in April to help not only raise funds, but create a space to discuss addictive behaviours and hear from people's stories and try and reduce the stigma associated to these issues. We've had over 1,500 people take on their personal and physical challenges during the month of April, such as running, cycling, jogging, whatever they can. I did 10,000 sit-ups in the month of April, and if it wasn't for Easter eggs, I'd be showing you some ripped abs. But it's been amazing to see these organisations collaborate and pull together across Australia and the globe to start a new conversation that engages the wider public. We hope that we can talk more openly and influence media, politicians and society in positive ways and try and challenge the stigma associated to this epidemic. Very briefly, I'm just going to leave you two quotes from participants and went on to be facilitators. In the constant retelling of my story, I experienced a continuation of shame and stigma that never left me. When I came to Smart Recovery, I cannot stress enough how liberating it was. I was hearing a new narrative. It was no longer being disempowered anymore. There was a new way of seeing and thinking about myself. The first Smart Recovery group, I found freedom that I never thought possible. And a quote from Mark, one of the main things that feeds stigma and discrimination is a sense of some people are morally inferior to others. The idea that some people are different, broken, and need to be kept at a safe distance. Smart helped challenge that notion and by explicitly discouraging stigmatising labels and the idea that some people are powerless and lack agency. SMART helped me say goodbye to toxic, unhelpful ideas like powerlessness and stigmatising labels and attitudes. I have simply moved on with my life. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. Nice to be hearing about addiction as a health issue and not a moral deficiency. So does anybody have any questions for Dan? We've got a couple of minutes before we break.
That was really great to hear from you, Daniel. Thank you so much. The question I have, they've developed guidelines for journalists. Are there guidelines for politicians on the way?
I think they would ignore them anyway, to be honest. Depends what politicians get voted in. So vote right in the next couple of months.
One up back.
Just touching on the guidelines for journalists, what are the barriers that Smart Recovery face in trying to get across to the media organisations in trying to adopt this?
Well, I think we know it all depends on what political things are happening and whatever drives the story of the day and whatever they're trying to spin on it. I guess I'm not sure what the barriers are for them to adopt that. Maybe because it isn't a glamorous subject and one that just seems to kind of get brushed under the carpet, or this portrayal is just so dramatic. So we do what we can. As I say, we ensure that those that are representing Smart Recovery at least have done some media training to be mindful and sensitive of the potential pitfalls and angles that media can come at you at, and try and just give a good an account, and hopefully we try and avoid those kind of stories like Dylan experienced,
Thank you again for a fantastic presentation, and as others have said, it's nice to actually see it in the space that it belongs, so thank you. I'm, like you, very interested in about the media representation of substance use, and in my work in mental health first aid, we don't use the word addiction as well, we refer to it as substance use. So for those of you who might have seen me today, I'm wearing a shirt of Grace Tame. And if you've been living under a rock in Australia for the last couple of years, you may not know who she is, but hopefully the majority do. And I just think it's really interesting when you were talking about that stigma and politicians and media. So we even saw a situation, some of you might remember Grace Tame, it's like, how do we make Grace Tame seem less credible or, more whatever in the eyes, and then decided to put a bong in her hands, right? Or smoking weed, and all of a sudden the position is apparently discredited. So I think, so I guess, as you said, politically, how do you say to a politician, pull your head in, let's not sort of decredit people just through their engagement with substance use?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have many dinner dates with politicians, so it's hard to say it, but I guess, as I said, we've got to just keep pushing on to try and just promote these campaigns that we spoke of, and just stand there and fight the corner. As I said, it's always going to be based on what political decisions, the flavour of the month at that time, unfortunately. But I think if we can start getting some of the media on board as well, then the politicians tend to listen to the media and vice versa. I don't know where it starts, but we do what we can to stand up and just talk about this in a normal way, and I see that in SMART meetings. I've seen an 18-year-old methamphetamine homeless guy giving advice to a director of a multinational company, and that wouldn't happen if we didn't create that space, so I think that's important. Maybe run out of time quick. Everyone's hungry.
One more,
We're all waiting on you. Everyone's
quick
hungry because of you.
I'm sorry. Oh gosh, now I've lost my train of thought. Thank you for a great presentation. These ideas like, once an addict or always an addict, powerlessness, all those, I think that the sector itself,
that I'm part of, the treatment sector, is a lot to blame in perpetrating those sort of images. Why is it that we're so attached to those ideas? Just
Isn't
not
that- is
to
that a
delay
question
lunch
for you
too
or for
much.
me?
No, it's for you. What do you think about me? Why do we hold on? We're trying not to, by the way. We're trying to move away from it in my patch. But what is it? I don't understand.
I genuinely don't know. I think I just come from my own personal experience in 20 years in this field as well, and I think it's very easy just to chuck something on. If there's a label there, it just means something that we can understand and we can accept, even though it might be unhelpful. And I think we do our best, and I know you do your best. I know you do a great job, but we are judgmental every single day. I guarantee you go out there and have lunch, you'll be judging people. It is human nature, but it's how we portray that and how we express that and communicate to people. We might still judge them in my head. It might be wrong, but we have to communicate effectively, and I think that's the biggest part of where we've fallen down, is people aren't able to open up and share their stories without being criticised or labelled in that way that they are deviant or there's something wrong with them, they're morally inept or incompetent, which is not true, because when we see the true identity and the strengths and the amazing resilience that these people and myself and whoever has been through that stuff, and we've heard all this in the last few days, it is amazing. And they've got a lot to teach us. So, thank you.